Will Chinese client stop replying? No updates, no decision, no movement. Most people think they already know what that means. Usually, they are wrong. Because one of the most expensive mistakes in China-related projects isn't lack of information, it's believing you've correctly interpreted the information you already have. And nowhere is that more dangerous than silence. Let's start with the observable fact. A client goes quiet, an email is unanswered, a proposal sits untouched. A meeting ends and nothing happens afterwards. This is the signal. Silence. The problem here is that most people would immediately move from observation to interpretation. The most common assumption is simple. They're not interested. The deal is dead. They are rejecting us. And to be fair, sometimes that's true. But the question isn't whether that explanation is possible. The question is whether it is the only explanation. What if the real problem isn't the silence itself? What if the real problem is becoming certain about an explanation that you cannot actually verify? Because once we become certain, we stop looking. And that's where expensive mistakes begin. Here is what I've noticed. From the outside, very different situations can look exactly the same. Internal evaluation, discussion is still happening. You're simply not part of it. Stakeholder alignment, the people in the meeting like the proposal, but someone still needs to agree, which happens a lot actually in China's enterprise because hierarchy matters a lot. Priority competition. Your project hasn't been rejected. It's competing against 10 other priorities. Budget constraints. Your project makes sense. The timing doesn't. The last one, genuine disinterest. Yes, sometimes the opportunity is fading, but notice something more important. All the 5 realities can produce exactly the same signal. Silence. Now let's be clear, none of these situations are unique to China. Internal reviews happens everywhere. Budget discussions happens everywhere. Stakeholder alignment happens everywhere. This is not a China-only phenomenon, but here is where China becomes important. The probability distribution behind the signal is different. In many Western business environments, silence is more often interpreted as disinterest because decision-making authority is often more visible and more concentrated. When communication stops, there is often a shorter path between evaluation and decision. But in many China-related projects, the process behind the signal can be much less visible. More hierarchies, more stakeholders, more alignments, more internal evaluation, more assessments, more layers between discussion and commitment. The silence itself isn't unique. What's different is how often the underlying causes occur, and that's where many foreign professionals get caught. They're not misreading the signal, they're applying wrong probability model to the signal. And that's why interpretation matters way much more than information. Most people think business mistakes happen because they don't know enough, but often the opposite is true. People know just enough to be overconfident. They see a signal, they create a story, and then they mistake the story for reality. Once you've chosen the wrong interpretation, everything follows become distorted. You follow up too aggressively or not aggressively enough. You forecast incorrectly. You allocate resources poorly. You lose opportunities that were still alive. Or you waste months chasing opportunities that were already dead. The cost isn't the silence. The cost is misclassifying the silence. And the professionals who consistently succeed in China don't necessarily have more information. What they have is a different habit. When most people ask, what does this mean? They ask, what else could this mean? And then they ask something even more important. Which explanation is more likely in this system? That sounds like a small difference, but it completely changes how they operate. As China becomes more important in global business, the advantage won't belong to those people who memorize the most facts about China. You could say 哪里哪里 or 过奖了 doesn't matter that much in business environments because information is increasingly available to everyone here on the internet. You can see me, everyone can see me, right? But interpretation is not. And here is a very uncomfortable question for you. If a Chinese client stopped replying tomorrow, would you actually know what signals you are looking at? Would you know which explanation is most likely? Or would you choose the explanation that feels most familiar? Most people don't know, they assume. If you are currently dealing with a China-related project, client, partnership, or team situation, I've created something called a China Signal Snapshot. It's a short diagnostic designed to identify the signals you may be misreading before they become like expensive mistakes. You submit the situation, we look at the signals, and together we identify which interpretation is most likely. You'll find the link in the description and the comments.